Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Good Fright and Boo Crew stamp sets from Hello Bluebird. So I've stamped my images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to do the fox first, and I'm using my favorite combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. Beginning with that YR18, I'm laying in some shadow under his hat. I want to have a shadow on his head where that would be casting a shadow, and also underneath his cape. And then I'm blending that out with the YR14 and making sure to really scrub over the edge of that YR18 so I get a nice smooth blend. I'll go back and forth and do those little squiggle marks to make sure that everything is broken up and there are no harsh lines left behind. And then I'll come in with my highlight shade, which is the YR12. I'm going to fill in most of the rest of him. I left a little white belly, and I also left some white socks on his hands and feet. And then I'm going to move over to the tail. I'm going to go back to my YR18 and add a deep shadow where his cape would be casting one, and then blend up toward the top with the YR14 and then the YR12. And he looks great as is. I really do love this combo, but today I decided to try something different. Because this is going to be a nighttime scene, I wanted something that was just a little bit deeper and richer. So I decided to grab my E19, and I'm going to add some of that in as my darkest. So the E19 is a earth tone, a brown tone, but it has a lot of reddish orange color in it. So it works great with these YR shades. So I went ahead and added that in, deepened up my shadows, especially those places where there would be a heavy shadow cast by his costume. And then I just went back down in the reverse, doing my second layer of coloring. I normally would have done a second layer of coloring anyway. That's just how I like to do it because it makes everything so much richer. But adding that E19 in there, I feel like that just really took things to another level, and I definitely will be using this combo again. I really liked how it turned out. While I have these shades out, I'm also going to use them to do the owl's beak. So I did a tiny sliver of the E19 and the YR18, and then use the YR14 for the rest. And then I'm going to move on to the white parts of my fox, and I'm using E40 and E41 for that, using a little shadow with the E41, also kind of blending in the transition areas of the little white socks on his hands and feet. And then I went in with my E40 to blend everything out, and it was really leaky. I mentioned recently that I just refilled all of my markers, and I even took the other end of the cap off, and it was still leaking pretty badly. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'll come back to it. It'll be fine in the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on to my squirrel mummy. So for the little bands of cloth that are wrapping around his body, I'm going to use these same shades, but I added in E42 for my darkest because I wanted them to look really old and, you know, kind of dirty like a mummy would be after all that dust has been collecting for so long. So I used the E42 for the darkest, like I said, and then blended out with the E41. I had left my E40 off to the side with both caps off to kind of dry out a bit, and then I thought I would try it again, but it was still really leaky. So I'm not sure what happened because I was really careful to measure out my Copics and have them be filled correctly, but this one just seems to want to leak, so I'm not sure what happened, but it was very easy to clean up with my colorless blender once I let everything dry. and then I could move on with the rest of the coloring. So I decided to do a gray squirrel today just for something different. I usually do red squirrels because they're my favorite, but I thought the fox being orange already, that the gray squirrel would be more different than the orange. And plus I have the orange pumpkins to come, so I didn't want another kind of reddish shade on there. So decided to do the gray. I went with warm grays. I used W00, W1, W3, and W5. Started with the W5 and did some shadow on the back of his head, also on his face where those bands of cloth would be casting a little shadow. I added that right over his eye area. The W5 is still light enough that that it doesn't create a problem with going over the eyes. And then I added like a little extra bit of swirl to his tail to make it look really nice and fluffy. And then I blended that out with the W3, and then I'm coming in with the W1. I'm going to color in the rest of him with the W1, with the exception of a little bit on his face. I saved that for the W00 because I just wanted it to look a little bit more like a white patch there. So I just went over that with the W00 and let that fade into the white cardstock. For the owl, I wanted, again, a very different tone than the other critters, so I went with the E70s. I really like the E70s for owls and different woodland critters. I really love the richness of tone in them. They're a dusty brown, but I really, really like them. They're kind of like a grayish, especially the lighter colors. So I went with E70, E71, E74, E77, and E79. I'm going to use the darkest 3 shades for the body and then the lighter 2 shades for the little patches around the eyes. So I started with the E79 and did my shadows, added a little bit up above his beak as well to just help his beak look kind of pushed out, and also accentuated the separate feathers of his wings. And then I began to blend that out with the E77. Again, making sure to do like the little scrubby motions to go over the edge of that E79 because it is quite dark. It is one of my darkest Copics that I own. So I really want to make sure that I don't get a harsh ring around his outer body with that. So I want to make sure I get a nice blend. So then I'm coming in with the E74 and doing the same thing, those little scrubby motions, little circles. That just helps break up that pigment and gets everything nice and blended. And then I will go over the tops of his little wings as well, and just make everything look a lot softer. So once I have that E74 finished up, I'll grab the E71 and do a little shading. I'm going to add it on the left side of each of his eyes since he's facing toward the right, and then blend toward the right with the E70. Then I wanted to give them some rosy cheeks, so I grabbed my R11 and R20. I'm also going to color in the inside of the foxes and the squirrel's ears with those shades. So just quickly doing that, and I'm even going to add it on the owl. I'm going to do it over the corner of the little eye patches, I guess you would call them, just because I don't think it'll show up very well on the darker parts of his body. And then I'm going to do some accessories. I wanted to do a very different color palette than you typically would see for Halloween, but definitely fall tones. So the first combo I'm using is RV66, RV69, and RV99. I don't use this combo really often, but I really love it. That RV99 has so much depth to it, and then the RV66 just brings the whole thing together. It's a really deep kind of wine red or maroon shade. And I wanted to do the hat band on the fox's costume to match, just so I would have that color in more than one place. So I did that. And then I also decided to just do a few of the little candies. Because they're so small, I just did the RV66 because I felt like the darker shades would just overpower those little candies. So I did a little bit on each of those, and then I'm going to move on to the rest of the fox's costume. I decided that he would be a wizard, so I didn't want to do like a black or a dark purple or anything, so I went with these really dusty teal shades. It's BG72, BG75, and BG78. So I started with the BG78 and laid in some shadows on the different parts of his cape, and then I'm blending toward the viewer, toward the right hand side, with the lighter shades, and ending on the BG72. I do wish that there was one shade darker than the BG78. There isn't one, but I feel like there needs to be to have a little bit more depth, but I didn't really have anything that fit. If you know of something, go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know. So I just decided to keep layering on those shades until I got to the level of richness that I wanted. I wanted something that was similar to the magenta tones that I had just used, but it's hard to achieve if the colors aren't dark enough. So I'm going to move on to his hat. Switching back to the BG78 for the shadows once again, which I'm placing on the left hand side there, since the hat is kind of tipped up toward the light, toward the right side. I'm going to put those shadows on the left. I also put a little shadow on the top and bottom of the hat band, and then blending toward the top edge where it's tipped up with that BG72. And I did do a second layer on that as well. I just did it off screen just to save some time. And then I added a bit of that BG72 to some of the candies as well. And then for the plastic wrapper, I grabbed BG70. So now I have all of those little pumpkin containers and lanterns, and I decided to do them all the same. I'm going to do them in a brighter orange combo, which is YR04, YR07, and YR09. And since I'm doing them all to match, I'm just going to quickly color them all together. So I'm just using that YR09 first on all of them, kind of drawing in some shadows and making the shape just accentuated a little bit. And then I'll come in with the YR07 and blend that up. So everything is going to be lightest on the top because I'm going to have a big moon in my scene, and that would be casting light from above. So I want the light to be at the top of the images and the shadows to be down at the bottom. So then I use the YR04 to fill everything in. And I decided not to do the inside with those shades. I wanted something that was a little bit brighter for the inside. So I'm going to come to that in just a second once I finish this little lantern. And then I'm going to grab some yellows, but they are definitely orange leaning yellows. So I did the Y38 first and also did the little eyes on the lantern and the mouth. But I felt like I needed another shade, so I grabbed the Y35 too to just finish that off. And then I'm going to move on to my leaves, and I wanted something that kind of matched everything but was a little more subdued because I really wanted your eye to be drawn to the critters. So I picked some really dusty purples and then added in a little brown as well to just give it that fall look. So I used E33 for the brown, and then Y91, Y93, and Y95 for the rest of the leaves. And I really like how they turned out. It took a couple coats to get it to kind of come together, but in the end, I think it worked, and it was just something different, totally different than anything I've ever tried before. So yeah, I think it looks nice. And I forgot to do the handle of the lantern on screen, but I ended up just doing that with a T5. And then I'm going to grab my black Sakura jelly roll marker and go over the open eyes on the critters. And then I'll trim these out with their matching dies. For my background, I've cut down a panel with the largest of the nesting square dies, and then I've also cut the moon from the full moon die set, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. This is Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock that I'm working on. First color that I'm adding is Cracked Pistachio, and I'm going to blend that in from all four sides and let it get nice and soft and white in the center. This is just the base layer, so I'm laying that on pretty heavily because I know a lot of this is going to get covered up, but I want my other colors to really blend well together. So once I have that laid on there, I'm going to darken that up with Evergreen Bough. So again, I'm going to come in from all four sides and just really deepen that up and create that nice vignette. So it really pulls your eye toward the center. It just focuses everything in toward the center of the card. So it'll be drawn to the sentiment and the adorable little critters that will be on our scene. So once I have the evergreen bough, I'm going to go back to the cracked pistachio and just work on the transition area and make sure everything is nice and smooth. And then I'll go in with my darkest shade, and that is going to be Pine Needles. So that one is quite a bit darker, but it's really going to add that halo effect that I'm looking for. I just want everything to have a lot of depth, but really get soft in the center. I don't want it to be too dark and gloomy. I know this is a Halloween scene, but I just wanted it to be bright and cheerful despite the season. I don't know. Sometimes I like doing things that are a little outside the box and not like typical of what you would think of for a season. So going back to the evergreen bough to bring that color toward the center again, and then finally going in with the cracked pistachio. And this time I'm going to bring it all the way into the center. So the area that I have left white up until now is only going to have one layer of that cracked pistachio on there. So it's going to stay nice and light. So once that's done, I'm going to set that off to the side to dry and move on to my moon. Just cleaned off my Waffle Flower Mini Media Mat first, so I didn't drag any green onto this white moon. And I'm going to color this one with some Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink. And I don't want to get too heavy-handed. I wanted the moon to stay nice and bright. So I'm doing it a little bit heavier on one side and then a little bit lighter on the other, just so it has a nice fade, and making sure that it's nice and smooth and doesn't have any little marks from the blending tool. And then I'm going to grab some water and squirt it onto my fingertips and flick the water droplets onto the moon, because that's going to create larger droplets because I wanted it to look like craters. And then I'll grab a paper towel and dab that up after a few seconds. Just added a little bit of texture on there, but just had something, a little more than just a plain white moon. So now I'm ready to assemble. I'm going to take my card front and add that to a craft card base. The card base is 5 1/4 by 5 1/4, which is the same size as the largest nesting square and also the full moon die. Both of those are 5 1/4 square. So I die cut the rest of that full moon die out of some black licorice cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So I did the frame and the tree in black. So I'm going to take my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue with that super fine nozzle and run that along the backside of the frame and adhere that first so I can make sure it's on there nice and straight, just lining it up with the edges of that card front. And then I will grab the inner piece and I'm going to add some more liquid glue to the back of that. And again, I just love this super fine nozzle for all of those little details. So it makes it super easy, and you don't get too much glue all over there. I got just like a tiny bit on the outside edge, but not very much. I'm going to set that down carefully because I want the moon to be behind the tree. So I'm just making sure that that is not adhered to the card front, and then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of that, slip the moon underneath, and then press everything down into place. I popped that into my MISTI so that I could stamp my sentiment, and I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp Happy Haunting to All. And I did stamp that down twice to make sure that I had a nice bold impression. And then I'm going to open up my card, and I'm going to finish off the sentiment in Lawn Fawn Walnut ink. And it's going to say, "And to all a good fright," which is really cute. And I did the little witchy bunny on the inside as well. I think he's so adorable. So I stamped that down a few times to make sure I had a good impression since those were brand new stamps. And now I'm ready to add my images. I'm starting with the fox since he's the largest one, and he's going to go pretty much in the center of the card with his hat kind of almost the same distance from the sentiment as the tree up top and below. And then over to his left, I'm going to add the little owl. He's kind of lagging behind because he's checking out his goodies and seeing how much he's got. And then out in front, who's more concerned with getting to the next house, is our little mummy squirrel. And I wanted it to look like he was in such a hurry to get going that he has dropped some candy along the way. So I'll be adding that in just a minute. But again, to accent that sentiment, I wanted to add the little bats. The second one got misplaced for a second there, but I did find him eventually, so I will add him onto the scene. But I'm going to move on to the leaves. I wanted those to just be like those last leaves that are just clinging on long after the season has ended. So I'm going to add one down here, and I just picked up that branch to make it look like the stem was tucked in. And then I went to try to find another one that I thought would look good. And I did shift that slightly. I thought it looked better a little higher. Then I found my other little bat. It had fallen on the floor. So I grabbed him and added him to my moon on the other side of my sentiment. So the sentiment is kind of framed in on all four sides. And then finally I added my little trail of treats, like I mentioned, to just complete the little story. And I couldn't resist adding a little Stardust Stickles to the scene, so I added some to the owl's little witch hat and also to the band on the fox's hat, and a little bit to each of the little treat bags and the lantern, and then also to the centers of the two leaves. So there is a closer look at those adorable trick-or-treaters and another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun creating this card, and if you did like it, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I used, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one of them to check them out. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.